This episode is about minutes 41 through 45 of The Rise of Skywalker with returning guest Dominic Sewell. Hello there, and welcome to Star Wars Music Minute, where we celebrate the music and sound of Star Wars 5 cinematic minutes at a time. I'm Chrysanthi Tan, you can call me Xanthi, and today is all about minutes 41 through 45 of Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. In this excerpt of the film, Rey shoots lightning from her fingers and destroys the First Order transport that she believes Chewie is on. She tells Finn about a creepy vision that she's had, and a manacled and very alive Chewbacca is taken to an interrogation cell. Also, Rey and the gang set course for Kijimi. Today's guest is Dominic Sewell, this is your second time, Dominic, a composer, I don't know, do you consider yourself a music theorist, music analyst?
Well, I suppose
wear
so
many
now,
hats.
yeah. I mean, I guess so. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, just like you may remember him from the tremendous Battle of Hoth set theory episode from Empire Strikes Back, where oh my gosh, that was such a tremendous episode. And Dominic has separately done a lot of his own Star Wars music analysis, so definitely check out his channel, and if you're watching this, you probably are already familiar. Anyway, thank you so much for coming back on Star Wars Music Minute, Dom.
It's an absolute pleasure, Xanthi. Thanks for having me. It's lovely.
Yeah, it's been too long since we've caught up, so. It
is actually, yes. And in my own sort of small world, I've kind of finished Empire Strikes Back, which was a real pleasure doing that concurrently, when you were doing it as well, and it was interesting to sort of compare notes and things. Sadly, I'm way behind with The Rise of Skywalker. I don't think I'll get to that until at least 2028 or something like that. So the next one for me is Return of the Jedi.
And that's my next one.
What's interesting is, oh, amazing! Oh, this is going to be great, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's tremendous. Well, I've already done the first cue, so I think
so you'll be ahead of me.
I've got a head start.
Yeah.
I'll have my work cut out. The whole sort of Ewok Endor sequence is just it goes on and on and on. And there's
did you
so
start
much
at the end, or
uh,
did you start all the way?
No, it's just I think one of my patrons wanted to know about the beginning cue because they said, "Oh, is this sort of hexatonic or octatonic?" And then I thought, "Oh no, I'm going to have to analyze it to find out now."
And I guess we started. Yeah.
So I had to do that one, but and I think I've done things like Brother and Sister, and which is in that fantastic volume called On the Track by Carlin and Wright, which is one of those sort of composer handbooks which were probably written in the maybe late 80s, early 90s, something like that. It's a huge volume. When it was first published, it was about that thick, and has a click book at the end. Well, the original edition had a click book at the end.
What's a click book?
It's to show you where, in terms of frames, so SMPTE timecode frames and BPMs, and it has a sort of correlation between beats per minute and what frame you should be on, given the current BPM.
What's that book called?
It's really technical. It's called On the Track by Carlin and Wright. Fred Carlin. Cool.
I'll put that in the show notes in case people want to check that out, because that sounds interesting. So you're saying the brother and sister theme is one of the examples in there?
Yes, I think they talk about characterization of different personalities. And of course, I think this is sort of, really apt with all of these sequel films because of Rey and, Kylo or Ben. I just think it's the way that they perhaps intertwine, or you have sort of different references to different sort of feeling. Rey being sort of quite hopeful and sort of jaunty at the beginning, and Kylo sort of dark on the one hand, but then conflicted as well on the other. And of course, I mean, what's interesting is the film that we're going to be discussing is, it's not just about Rey sort of accepting herself, but it's also about Ben, Kylo, finally, after 3 films, sort of, kind of redeeming himself as well.
That's so true.
extraordinary and emotional thing. I mean, I rewatched the film in prep for today, and it was really interesting going back to it because I think it's very easy to just forget about the the talent that's required to make these pictures. And I know that there's a whole sort of section of fans who sort of moan constant things, but I think they sometimes don't fully appreciate the amount of expertise and perhaps worry and questioning that goes into all of these films. And yes, for whatever, some decisions are disastrous and some decisions are great from a fan point of view, but they're not ill thought out. I mean, they will have debated about all of these things for weeks and sort of proper, it might be that one person won out and the rest of them didn't, and I think maybe that was perhaps what plagued the prequels, was that nobody was able to sort of say to George, well, hold on a sec, is this really a good idea or not? But you have to respect the decision making and the fact that there's a lot of thought that goes into it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really important to remember, is that there is a lot of work and talent that goes into making even the films we're not super happy with. Yeah.
Absolutely. But yes, I mean, this particular film has such an emotional punch. And also, I think in this particular clip they're about to see, we don't really know what Kylo's motivation is at the beginning, because the last scene is basically Palpatine saying, kill her, sort of thing. But he's not. But there's also a little bit unsaid, isn't there? Because he says, you don't know her true identity, but I do. And then it sort of cuts to another sequence, and that's all we're left with. So we don't know whether Palpatine's actually told him at that point.
Do you mean at the end of the movie, or at the end of like these minutes?
No, just at so just in the previous minutes. So I think when it was whatever it is, 36-40 or 35-40 or whatever.
Yeah.
I think in those, I think we don't fully know, Kylo's motivation at that point, where he sort of comes to, basically entrap them.
Yeah. I suppose we can overlay our own assumptions about what he knows. But
Absolutely.
there's still
Yes.
room for any of those details to be filled in and reveal our assumptions to be incorrect.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think that's quite clever filmmaking because, it's not being very obvious about what's going on. Whereas some bits in the film, it's very obvious. Hello, I'm C-3PO. I'm cyborg, he reintroducing himself constantly. And of course, when he has his memory wiped and stuff like that, he has to reintroduce himself again,
Right.
which is a long-running joke in the whole franchise, of course. But yeah, I just sort of I like the fact that the audience is left to make a decision for themselves, which is then gradually revealed, and it's a convincing reveal as to what Kylo was. I just wanted to see what you could do, essentially. Subsequently. But yeah, it's quite shocking at the time for the viewer if you haven't ever seen the film before and you see this sort of, well, we'll get to it, won't we?
Yeah, we certainly will. Maybe we should just jump right into the minutes.
Let's do it.
Cool. Okay. Here we go. Rey's holding her hand out, so is Kylo. Okay, I'll stop there. There's more. We still have 10 seconds to go before Rey shoots lightning from her fingers, but there's already so much to talk about, I feel.
There is, yes. Well, I mean, interesting that it starts off with that huge B. It's
Yep.
just a big build-up of just the note B. I think it's B.
It is a B. Mhm.
Yeah, I had this really weird thought about sort of being reminded of Wozzeck. I think it's Act 3, is it? Something like that. Yes, it's in Scene 2, Act 3. And it's just at the end of the scene. You just get this huge one-note sort of unison chord, which is just done on the whole of the orchestra plays it.
I think I spelled that
by
right.
Alban Berg. Yeah, I think so.
Something like it's an opera.
That's it. That's it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'll
And,
play the.
I mean,
do you want
you
me
know,
to play the clip from it?
yeah, go on. Yeah.
Okay. Dom has already seeded this clip with me, so all right. Here. Yeah. That's sustained B.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
It's just a sustained B, but the funny thing is that emotionally in the film, it's so shocking because, of course, in 12-tone serial music that was written, it becomes so tonal, but also quite dark, and the precursor of these particular minutes is of that sort of chord. I don't think it's the whole orchestra, but it's certainly most of the brass section. And then suddenly it goes into both, I think, of Kylo Ren's themes. So sort of what Frank Lehman, have a cup of coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
I think is the
Right.
thing, says about Kylo Ren's theme A, and then his theme B, which is the bum 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 ba da dum bum, a bit later on, which is supposed to be that sort of conflicted thing, which in itself is sort of quite obscure, isn't it? Again, we're not sure of his motivation at that point. Should we listen to it? Do you mind if we listen to that first bit again?
Oh, absolutely. I'm just going to put from Frank Lehman's catalog, complete catalog of the musical themes of Star Wars. He has Kylo Ren A, aggressive, which is the main one that everyone knows, and the hesitant one is and I actually think Frank's descriptions are really good. He always describes things really nicely. So Kylo Ren A, he says, chief theme for the primary antagonist of the sequel trilogy, Kylo Ren, short, simple, and insistent, a defiant, overweening motto for a conflicted man who wishes to project power, for all its bravado, never quite fully actualized as a leitmotif, subjected to true development and transformation only in The Rise of Skywalker, in the redeemed variant. And then the hesitant one is the other half of Ren's musical personality, threatening but unsure, sometimes with a pathetic quality. Like Kylo Ren A short motto prone to immediate repetition rather than long-breathed grammatical theme. Underlying harmony, reiteration of initial pitch, and overall clipped character suggests a stunted, inadequate mirror of more confidently malevolent Imperial March.
Yeah, I mean...
He's a really good writer.
This is why Frank is a professional musicologist, and I'm not. I would never have thought of those words. I mean, I can't think of any time I would ever use the word overweening, but it's a wonderful expression.
It is.
And
I love the inadequate mirror of more confidently malevolent Imperial March.
Absolutely, yeah.
So good.
Yeah, and actually it kind of typifies not just Kylo, but the whole of the First Order, really, doesn't it? I mean, they're all a bit sort of ineffective or inadequate slightly. I mean, evil, totally, but sort of not particularly competent in many ways.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
I mean, especially General Hux, he's all sort of puffed up, and of course then the other general who sort of takes over.
Pride or whatever. But we also Snoke is like a knockoff Palpatine, like a knockoff Emperor. Like,
yeah,
everything is just
obviously,
a shoddy clone of the Empire.
Yeah, of something, yes. And it's like a poor reflection of what once was a sort of overwhelming power, but now is sort of, the front is the First Order, and then behind it all is Palpatine sort of having worked all that time, we're led to believe, in behind the scenes in these sort of outlying space fields somewhere in the middle of nowhere. But
so I can. Do you want me to play the beginning of these again? The minutes.
Yeah, I think
can
so.
hear that
Let's
beat?
let's just
And then I want to follow up on something that you said about Wozzeck. Okay. appears hesitant. Nice timpani hits. Okay. In Wozzeck, okay, for those who aren't familiar with this particular opera, it is, it doesn't sound like the magic flute, to say the least. It is, there's actually a good video about it that I'll put in the show notes. I don't know if you've seen it. Who did it? Is it David Bruce? Someone did an episode, like a YouTube video about Wozzeck that compared it to Guinness beer, like an acquired taste. It was like one of those, it was like, I'll put the link in the show notes, but it was, like I used that video to introduce someone to Wozzeck, basically. Yeah, it was, I wish I could remember. But anyway, it's a 12-tone opera, right?
Yeah.
And Berg was a student of Schoenberg?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, his sort of application, I suppose, of 12-tone theory is less rigorous than others. So, I mean, you know, some people sort of put Webern on sort of one side of the spectrum and then Berg sort of on the other side of the spectrum in some ways. Because Berg, I think, you know, he wasn't afraid of tonal implications.
Yep.
Whereas Webern was. And sort of avoided them. So anytime you have a third or a sixth, it's sort of like, oh, no, none of that.
Right. Let me play, actually, I'm going to play a little bit from the clip that you gave me, just from the beginning of it.
Die Stadt, siehst du noch weit, komm schneller. Du sollst da bleiben, Marie, komm, setz dich. Aber ich muss fort. Komm. Bist weit gegangen, Marie.
Anyway, it's a very dark story. It's very tragic and very dark. And I remember when we learned about this opera, like in school, it was sort of the part, most people were kind of like not into it. I remember just like, oh, this is weird. I don't know. This is kind of tricky. This is kind of not easy to grasp. And while there is tonality, there's also so much atonality. And something you said earlier where the B, you said something like the B becomes almost tonal. And is that because, were you saying that because in the sustaining of that one note, it becomes a sort of like, I mean, you become very aware of that one pitch? Is it like the consonance of it that is drawn out?
Absolutely, yes. I think that the mere repetition of something reinforces it in our minds as a tonic. Mm-hmm. And there's, and you know, composers have been sort of fascinated with this for, you know, centuries. And it was a very good exercise, actually, which I think I did with a bunch of students, this is years ago now, where I was introducing them to the concept of sort of tonic and dominant. But instead of going into the Baroque era and talking about the major-minor tonal system, I played them a piece by Ligeti called Musica Riccata, and the first movement of that is just one note. But at the end of that whole movement, he introduces a second pitch. And so all the time that we think we've heard a tonic, because of the second pitch and the nature of it, that whole thing was a dominant. In other words, sort of the fifth note from the root of a scale. Mm-hmm. And it sort of subverts our conscious awareness of home key. And with Wozzeck, I think the point is that interestingly enough, I think that whole scene starts with a B as well, actually, as a pedal note, and then all sorts of different things sort of come in. But it's a way of sort of solidifying something and feeling comfortable. But the interesting thing is that in Wozzeck, instead of a tonic feeling comfortable, it feels really uncomfortable. It's almost sort of shocking. And especially if you've heard all 11 other notes and then suddenly you hear a B, it's like, what am I? It's supposed to be disorientating. And I suppose, in those days of the, 1910s, 20s, 30s, disorientation was very much a sort of part of some composers' output, purposefully. And, Williams is very clever at sort of chameleon-like taking things from different aspects of the whole sort of spectra of music and sort of reinventing them, but in his own sort of language. And I mean, it probably seems a bit far-fetched to talk sort of intellectually about sort of all these other composers just from one note. But it's I don't know how sort of significant it is, but it just reminded me of the fact that certain pitches and certain pitch combinations have sort of interesting connotations, which we're not always aware of, depending on our upbringing. It depends how we've been brought up and what education you've had and everything else. I mean, ultimately, of course, it just has to be effectual, emotive music. And of course, Williams is extremely clever at doing that. But I think, other composers are as well, but in a different context. Mm-hmm. And certain pitches and certain presentations of those pitches have different meaning, which we can assign depending on the context. So yeah, it was just a simple sort of thought experiment, really, rather than any sort of conclusive thing about, John Williams.
Now I'm curious. Do you mean pitch?
B.
Do you mean the like the absolute pitch, or do you mean like its function or something else? Do you mean like a B?
I think I think just its function. So just having a unison pitch. So like, is it a tonic or is it a pedal note, or, what's the function of it? What is it doing? And I think in the clip that we've just heard, it is a sort of tonic, because other things come in. And I think then Kylo's theme, his B theme comes in on the same sort of key area, the same sort of tonal area.
Yeah.
So it sort of sets it up. But also what's interesting is that with the sound in total, it's this big unison sound and it's quite high. And then in the middle, you've got all of these sort of TIE fighter type of sounds. I can't remember what Kylo's ship is called, by the way. Sorry about that.
TIE Whisper.
Yeah, there we go. I knew you would know. And you get this sort of type sort of middle sound. And I think John Williams has sort of very carefully orchestrated it so that he allows space for, high winds and low brass and that sort of thing to come in around that sound. And I always sort of think that's an incredibly impressive aspect of his work, which perhaps doesn't quite get appreciated. And vice versa, and is that, there might be certain scenes where the sound designer only has the score and then has to produce the sound around that score. So it works both ways. Mm-hmm. But I love that interaction between, the designers and the music as well. I think it's so clever.
Yeah, I was definitely noticing how the hum of the ships seemed to really fit into the music.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the sort of equivalent of somebody tuning their rock drum set, so that they manage to find the right pitch and sort of keep tuning their toms and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the tonic, just to remind people, is the root, is the home base of a key. So if B is the tonic, that means we're basically in the tonal center of B. And so when Kylo Ren's theme comes in, he does come in on the fifth. So it is still it's really driving home that B minor. And then when the second theme comes in, it also. Comes in on the D, which is the third.
Yeah,
Of B.
absolutely. And it has that sort of amazing oblique interval right at the end, where I think you ended up on a B flat or an A sharp.
Yep.
Yeah, which is a typical sort of John Williams interval to have.
Oh, definitely. We're going to get talking about half steps is going to be is on the agenda today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Excellent.
I'll keep playing. Also, okay,
Yeah.
so where we are is now Kylo and Rey are both with their hands up toward the transport.
Yeah.
We are not giving up if we...
Sorry, ooh, my mouse skipped to a different part. Okay, I'll go back. Okay, here we are. Knights of Ren. This climb. Yeah. And we know what that sound is.
Yes. Poor.
Yeah.
Look at that. Sith lightning. Oh. And I suppose, I mean, interestingly, for the on screen cinematically, I think that's the first time we've ever seen Sith lightning from a non-Sith, isn't it? I mean, is that right? I think that's right. Oh, I
think
suppose
so,
there was
yeah.
that bit where Yoda sort of
Well,
kind
he
of
redirects it.
He redirects it, yeah, but it doesn't. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't actually come
Yeah.
from him.
Yeah.
So yeah, very interesting.
But that's also really cool.
And also the fact that the huge amount of force required to, you know, if we remember back to Empire Strikes Back, how much effort it was for, well, both Yoda and Luke to sort of get the X-wing out of, the swamp in Dagobah, to actually now just drawing a starship out of the sky.
Yeah.
On both counts, it's just sort of like, wow, yeah, quite impressive. But yes, that music just climbs and climbs and climbs by semitonal increments, doesn't it?
And before, I feel what I'm hearing is a failed climb in the brass. Kind of falls before it goes back up, like the effort waning, but coming back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and interesting that he didn't go dee-da-da-dee-dee-dim-bum,
Right.
bum. He doesn't use that C sharp, does he? He ignores that.
Which would be, in his octatonic,
Yes.
which we get later, which we get just a few seconds later.
Yeah. I mean, it is I mean, even with the absence of that note, it's still octatonic, probably.
Yeah, that's true.
But there's no avoiding it in this particular film. I think actually it is very heavily octatonic based, and also there's so much action music in the whole film. I mean, it's very action orientated anyway. But absolutely, and of course we think, the shot before is you do see two transports, but maybe for 6 frames. I'm just not, so it's obviously shown to the audience, but it's shown so quickly in the editing process that I'm not sure that people sort of really clock onto that. If you sort of stop with the pleasure of DVDs and Disney Plus, we can sort of just pause and you can see that, obviously there are 2 ships and we don't know which one's there.
Yeah, which is smart. It's good to show the audience that so that you could,
Absolutely. But it's also redirection and misdirection rather. To think that, of course, Chewie's in there and Rey's horrified, absolutely horrified. And the music that goes with that horror just comes a little bit after that lightning sequence, I think.
I mean, I think I definitely was misdirected redirected, like most people in the theater. I didn't see the
Same,
other one. And
No.
I think I think it's normal to have a bias toward believing what the protagonist believes. So Rey believes that Chewie's there, so I believe Chewie's there.
Yes.
She knows
And I
better than
think
me,
also-
surely.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for those of us traumatized by the Expanded Universe books, I mean, anything's possible.
Oh, that's true. Anything is possible.
I'm not even going to say what it is, just in case
No,
people
please
haven't
say
read
it.
those books. Okay, well, Chewie dies. There we go. Raging at this sort of thing in a sort of incredible, heroic Wookiee-like manner.
Well,
Yeah,
good thing
There
that's
we
just
go.
a legend now.
it is just legends, indeed. But I think, so even for those people who read those books, they killed Harrison Ford, so now it's, oh no, everybody's dropping. And there's a lot of death in that whole sequel. It's sort of the demise of all of those original characters, really, in some ways. But it's sort of interesting. Yeah, I mean, the music is very angsty. Of course, it has to be. It's just a typical build of Williams to do. And it's definitely got, I think this score, do you think this score has more in common with Revenge of the Sith than any other particular film? And maybe Return of the Jedi as well, because of the themes of Emperor and stuff like that. But just in terms of the sound world, do you think that's true or not?
Sound, or do you mean the sound in general, or like the music?
Yeah, just the
specifically?
music. I mean, just the way that the themes work and the sort of minor dark character of a lot of it.
I think the music in this film trends toward more redemptive than in Revenge of the Sith, where in Revenge of the Sith it gets progressively more dark and tragic. Here, the
Yes.
dark and tragic stuff feels more limited to mottos and not so things that don't get so much development. Like I'm thinking, like the immolation from Revenge of the Sith. There's nothing
yes.
like that here.
Yeah.
Here, in fact, we have Kylo's theme turns to the redemptive form, and then we have lots of like heroism at the end. So I feel like the darkness here is more evil darkness, whereas the darkness in Revenge of the Sith is more like tragic, tormented, like it's more of a protagonist darkness or something.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's all down to Williams, isn't it? I mean, that's his way of interpreting the essence of a film. And again, I think people don't give composers enough credit sometimes for how clever they are as dramatists. I mean, to have a real understanding of the story, the real inner being of the story, I think is an extraordinary thing. And that never gets taught in film composition classes, because we're all concerned with notes and music and, all of this sort of stuff. But actually, we really forget.
At the core of it,
about-
you have to be a dramatist
Yeah.
first.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think about this all the time with like John Williams. He has his own interpretations of what's going on. Like I want to hear his take on like the scenes and stuff.
And I'd be fascinated to be a fly on the wall with a conversation with him and Spielberg, for example, about how they discuss things. And I think he has sort of. It was amazing. I found a podcast that he did actually not that long ago. I'm trying to remember what it was, and when I do remember, I'll send
John
it to
Williams?
you. And, yes, and he sort of randomly came on a podcast with these dudes, when I was on Twitter, which I've left now. I listened to the whole hour, and it was incredible. Of him talking very relaxed about the sorts of discussions that he might have with the director, and that there would never necessarily be disagreement, but they would sort of try to get to the essence of, what it is the director actually wants in that scene, or what he wants the emotional response to be. And John Williams really picking apart exactly what they mean. So that there's no technical detail about the way that he'll eventually realize that musically. But he really wants to get confident about exactly what is going on. What are the motivations of the characters at that particular point, and why are they doing this? And there's a lot of query. And I think that's a really fascinating thing.
That's really cool. I definitely want to hear that. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think also it's something that composers could do more of is really get to the nitty gritty. Okay, well, this is your view. Are there any other views about what the audience might think? Because of course, directors and producers are very close to the picture and might not necessarily pick up everything that an audience might. So I find that interesting as well.
Totally. That's really cool. I'm going to keep playing.
Yeah.
So hear this other brass climb that's going to happen. Knights of Ren. Very good sound design.
Yeah.
And this this climb up, it alternates the half and whole steps.
Yeah.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Octatonic climb. And there's a progressive, kind of slowing of it. The tension increases.
Yes. And actually, just the simple fact of breaking up that rhythm into eighth notes is a clever way of slowing it down, actually.
Totally. It's like stretching out a video, and then you start to see way more frames in between, and you're like, we're kind of hearing more frames in between these notes.
Yeah. And also, it's a classic device of increasing tension because, of course, it's climbing, it's progressive, it's moving forward, it adds energy. Anything that moves up is adding energy, and anything that moves down is usually doing the opposite, but not always.
I think they do a good job, like Daisy Ridley, the director, showing the exertion. And I think it's interesting comparing her outstretched hand with which it looks like it's very tensed, like her fingers are her knuckles are kind of buckling, and Kylo Ren's hand looks less effort is involved in doing the same thing. Like she's exerting herself, like she doesn't know the limits of her strength yet, and she hasn't really explored the edges, I think, yet, which is why when she's exploring the edge now and she goes too far and, shoots lightning. I almost called him Finn. Kylo Ren feels not necessarily relaxed, but he's done stuff of this level before and can channel other stuff, darkness, and he's a little bit more, He's still not the level of Darth Vader or anything, but he's certainly more practiced than Rey.
Yeah, absolutely. And the music sort of, it stretches in as much as both of them reach out. Almost.
It's almost like the low note is Kylo and the higher note is Rey, and they're matching each other.
And also there are 5 fingers. And
it ends with Rey, who gets the last word.
Exactly, yes. And I think, sometimes I wonder whether John Williams thinks very visually about this. And there's a whole section a bit later on in Rise of Skywalker where they go to Endor and they see, the fallen Death Star with the huge waves. And the music, and I believe that Frank says inexplicably from Attack of the Clones where... they go to Kamino. You've got these sort of lovely sort of ad sixths type arpeggiated chords.
Yeah.
But that's a wave. Yeah. And I just wonder whether there's a lot of visual imagery that Williams emits in his melodic outputs in some ways.
Yeah, you're talking about sort of on Kamino. There are the waves and the water surrounding.
Yes.
You know, and then also on Kefbir, where they go later, there's those waves and
Yeah.
the waves basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And the same motive comes back twice as well,
Mm-hmm.
but in completely different contexts. So I wouldn't be surprised at that sort of visual imagery giving rise to a musical actual notes.
I like that, and now it makes me feel like one could possibly craft theories in reverse by hearing a theme and then thinking, was the original manifestation, like, was the original thing that he was scoring, was it waves in an ocean, and maybe the theme sticks and the ocean's taken away or something eventually, but now I'm just curious.
I'm sure. I mean, it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Yeah. Anyway, the little Knights of Ren thing, which is, it was... Actually, I don't remember exactly what it was in this instance. Okay, let's go back. Do you remember? There's like a few different Knights of Ren versions. Oh, that's it.
Yeah. Ba-ba-la-ba-ba.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just another little half step thing.
Yeah. Yeah. But also, that rhythm as well. Mm-hmm. He must have thought, well, how many of those iterations do I need to make word?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Is it 7? Is it 6? How do you come to the decision of?
Yeah. How do you? Because he also changes it sometimes. He switches it up. He doesn't always do 6.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
I think it's 5 in this time.
Yeah. So yeah, it's derived from the. I'm just sort of having a look at the catalogue here with Frank's catalogue. Thank goodness, by the way, that we have a catalogue of all these things.
I know. It makes everything so much easier.
It really
Because
does.
also just knowing, just having something named makes it so much easier to recognize and build off of.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can constantly refer back to it and refine it and everything else as well. It's remarkable. And I also wonder whether, does John Williams keep notes somewhere else that we don't know of and sketches? Because he must do. There must be some sort of level of diary keeping where he sort of comes up with themes and things, then writes them down somewhere else so he can refer to them. Unless they're all in his memory. And if you count out how many leitmotifs and themes that are in the entire Star Wars franchise, could you keep all of those in your head?
I mean, hell no. I also really want to know what his own note keeping or how he remembers. Yeah. Because he must have some internal way of keeping everything straight. He's got it, right? Right?
Absolutely.
Probably.
Must do.
Yeah.
I mean, must do. But I wonder whether that's developed over a period of years. So, between A New Hope and Empire, me and Frank were speculating a while ago whether to think that, the Imperials motif just is not in Empire really at all. And it becomes the Imperial March. And it was because he just forgot? It could be.
It could be,
Or that he just wanted to just sort of...
he liked the new one better.
That's not working. I like the new one better. I think that should be there. And so then doesn't deliberately reference the original one. And I think it's probably the latter. But he must have kept notes of these things. There's just no way you could sort of contain all of that in your head. It's just not possible.
I think maybe it's hard to imagine because sharing information is so easy over the internet now. That if a composer were actually a composer as famous as John Williams were keeping their own notes for a franchise as famous as Star Wars, I would feel like they're going to share it at some point because it's a cool thing to share that people would like to hear. Like they would certainly mention it on a podcast. They would certainly post their images on social media somewhere. But I think because John Williams he's not secretive. He just doesn't necessarily see. If he has these notes, he may not see them as a piece of content. Like a composer today probably would. Yeah, so yeah, I'm thinking like if he does have these notes, he's being incredibly restrained in not like just telling everyone about them because he plays very, I don't know, he plays very cool when it comes to his process. He doesn't really, he goes into detail when asked, but he doesn't dramatize or he doesn't go into the emotional details of how much work doing something was and how many steps he did. He sort of, it feels like his process is still behind a shroud a little bit. And maybe it's because it's so natural for him. Like he doesn't think to enumerate all of the steps maybe.
Yeah.
And he's certainly
Absolutely.
not like, oh, I call this theme. I hear people in the media call it that theme. Like he keeps tight-lipped.
Yes, I mean, there could be some deliberate attempt to hide it. I mean, with sort of, studying, let's say, Stravinsky, for example, he left a lot of sketch material and we can all refer to it. And same with Beethoven as well. We can all have a look at how something was written. What's interesting about Beethoven, though, is that the sketch doesn't necessarily bear any relation at all to the, or much relation to the the outward product. Whereas in Stravinsky it does, and you can see in sort of Rite of Spring there are a bunch of Lithuanian folk melodies which have obviously become part of the whole sort of score. So I don't know whether Williams works in that way at all, and he doesn't really talk about the specifics of the technique of his work at all. He talks about broad strokes and modalities. I've heard him use that word a lot, particularly when he was discussing, I think it's on the Alex North Spartacus DVD extras at the end. There's an interview with John Williams talking about Alex North and that he knew him very well. And it's a really interesting interview, which again, I'll if you remind me at the end, I'll send you a link. I'll remind myself now and send you a link later on. Just I think sort of viewers and listeners might be interested in having listened to that, because he, Alex North for him was a real guru. And what's interesting about North was that he sort of rejected the, let's call them the German emigre type of sound world, by which I mean sort of Bernard Herrmann and Max Steiner and all of those, and actually was much more in favor of a sort of Russian-French method and school. So, I mean, Copland was much more of a sort of Ravel, sort of French method. Stravinsky obviously worked in America anyway. His whole system was of separation of function in the orchestra. So, for example, that, harmony will be in the brass, but nowhere else. The melody will be in the strings, maybe a little bit of wind, but nowhere else. The bass line might be a bit more blended, so that double basses will have contrabassoon and occasionally tuba. But, that's a bit, more of a blended thing. But there's a huge separation of function. And that was something that French orchestration method, and particularly Russian, there was a little bit of blend, was much more in favor of than the sort of Austro-Hungarian or German tradition of blended orchestration like Wagner, where everything is sort of, the cor anglais sounds a little bit like a viola. Let's blend those, muted trumpets when played really low sound a bit flute-like and stuff like that. There's none of that at all. I mean, there is a little bit, but not as much.
What do you think this difference in philosophy and approach, what do you think it sounds like to listeners? Like, how would listeners perhaps spot the difference?
I think there's a clarity about the way musical ideas are presented, and I think American music
in the sort of French, Russian, versus the Austro-German.
Yes, I think there's much more clarity in the way things are presented, but that's it's an observation. I don't know whether it's a fact or not. Yeah, it's just an observation, and I think that. Williams tends to favor those textures because I think when he wants melody, he really goes for melody. Everything's playing the melody. And only a few things are playing harmony. So you don't need it. And he wants that to sort of come forward. So
it's perhaps less heavy.
Yeah. And gloopy. And, you know,
Yeah.
I suppose with 19th century romantic Germanic orchestration, not all of them were particularly good at it.
Yeah.
So you get this sort of very gloopy sound.
Yeah, I went to a concert at it was LA Phil. It was in about February, and I think it was part of their series of John Williams, basically celebrating John Williams. It was a John Williams spotlight, like maybe month or season or something. And this was the concert. I think it was like the big cap concert that was supposed to be celebrating John Williams. And actually, there were only like a couple pieces of John Williams on the concert, but it was curated by John Williams. It was a century of film music, and David Newman conducted. It started with the 20th Century Fox fanfare. There was, Steiner. There was stuff from Vertigo. There was stuff from Wuthering Heights, Once Upon a Time in the West. Lots of classic stuff. Captain Blood, and I wrote a review of this concert for the San Francisco Classical Voice, and my biggest takeaway from this was like, very interesting to hear all the different film music, but you know what? Like, John Williams's things were the best things on the program. I don't have as much of a taste for like Steiner and some of those old German composers. I don't know why. But yeah, I found Williams's stuff to be more interesting.
Yes, I mean, I think, in a few years' time, Williams will go down as one of the greatest orchestrators. Really, I mean, yes, there are sort of fine details that are left to, Herb Spencer and Conrad Pope and Arthur Morton and others, but he does write everything really, and there is a real clarity about what he does. And, when you go into his music like I do in a sort of forensic detail, there are lots and lots of things that you could find in John Williams which are replicated in, amazing orchestrators like Wozzeck and Tchaikovsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, of course, Stravinsky, all over the place. Even Mozart and to a certain extent Beethoven as well, sort of incredibly clever ways of presenting material that is clear. It doesn't, there's nothing extraneous. There's nothing which is sort of over-egged at all, even when it's sort of absolutely boisterous and ridiculous. I mean, all of those cues in Phantom Menace, I mean, there's a lot going on, all of those battle sequences, and same with this film, Rise of Skywalker as well, huge amounts of material presented, but it's always presented in a very clear, concise way, mainly because the balance of layers of octave doubling is not over compromised by too many layers of other things going on. And so there might only be, what is the melody? There will be one. There might be a counter melody, but if it is, it's somewhere else. There's harmony and there's a bass line. That's it. And often a sparsity of percussion. You don't need it when you've got those explosions going on. Do we really need lots of bass drums and tam-tams and timpanis and things? Not really.
Yeah, that's a real skill that I learn every time. Like every time I arrange something or compose something with multiple voices, or even worse, if I have unlimited voices, because I'm just like on a DAW, I find it so easy to create a mix of instruments and parts that are muddy, where you can no longer hear the separation between them, or where it just feels too busy, and where sometimes taking out a part or something can yield more clarity. And it takes trial and error sometimes, and I'm in awe of John Williams's ability to orchestrate.
Absolutely. Well, same. I mean, he did have a very good education in the sense that he was a studio pianist for many, many years, and he was able to go to the third trombone and go, buddy, if you play this, is that possible? No, not really. It's too high. You should keep everything on the stave. Don't have it go beyond a middle C, otherwise nobody will be hear it. But
Yeah, learning from the players is essential.
Yeah, but in rack 2, the bass trombone goes above the second trombone. Yeah, but nobody plays it like that. They just swap instruments. And it's sort of little sort of things where it might be written down by a famous orchestrator or famous composer, but nobody actually plays it like that. There's huge swathes of Strauss harp parts which have been completely rewritten by the harpists. So if you go and look at their personal harp parts, Rachmaninoff, sorry.
It's okay.
Composer slang. They've been completely rewritten because they're impossible to play. You can't play in octaves like that. It's just absolutely impossible. So you just play one octave and the second harpist plays the lower octave. Very simple solution. But interesting in Williams, where he does have two harps quite a lot of the time, particularly in the original things, they either play in unison or they just simply, it's just for pedaling purposes, like, you can't change that many pedals in that short amount of time, so I have a second harp. Exactly the same way that Ravel or somebody like that would write for harp. And they tend to be, usually quite standard harp parts as well. But anyway, we digress slightly, but it's always interesting to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'm picking up after she shoots lightning.
We gotta go! They're coming! Ray, come on! Ray! We gotta go! Ray! Chewie! Ray, come on! Ray!
She's looking down at her hand. And now we're in space. And now we're in OG's ship.
It wasn't your fault.
So yeah, just that was the kind of anguished music that you were referring to. Yeah, the What Have I Done?
Yeah.
Which is like a nightmare of a feeling. That's a horrible thing to feel.
Oh, absolutely. And also he's quite clever, I think, at that point, not sort of changing the harmony too much. There's a lot of appoggiatura rather than a change of chord on the second beat. So it's just one chord, but with, two notes at the top over that sort of sustained harmony.
Yeah, it is pretty simple.
Yeah.
Overall,
Definitely. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Anyone could write it. No.
I wish we could.
Okay. So there's no music for a little bit, and then we'll start in about 10 seconds.
It was.
No. It was Ren. He made you do
Chewie's
it.
gone. That power came from me. Finn never thinks you don't know.
Then tell me.
Yes.
I had a vision of the throne of the Sith and who was on it.
Ren?
And me.
Okay, we'll stop there for a second. If you have the For Your Consideration soundtrack, when the music comes back in, that's the start of track 5, A Prisoner. It's not on the OST, just on the For Your Consideration.
And more octatonic goodness in that as well, right at the end. Yeah, it's interesting how he uses the octatonic scale in so many different ways. I mean, I've seen it in so many cues of so many different, films, and each time sort of feels fresh. How does he do that? It's so annoying. I mean, I wish we could all do that, but we can't. I mean, it's amazing how one scale of, 8 notes basically can produce such contrasted material. Incredible. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You get sort of maximum emotional capability from the minimal amount of material.
Yeah, and he uses it. He uses it both liberally and sparingly, I feel.
Yes.
Like he knows when to not go too far with it. Like earlier when he goes to a D instead of a D flat. Like he can break form.
Absolutely, and he does frequently, I think, as well.
Yeah. Here we have a little viola. Again, it's like that half-step alternation at the top.
Absolutely, and also the where it's played in the viola. So interesting enough, when that solo occurs, I don't think anything really is playing. Nothing's masking that range of the viola, because it is. I mean, although it's very rich when you play it in a solo way, I can imagine in an orchestra, if there's lots of other things going on, it's going to get a little bit lost because of where it sits on the strings. But yeah, wonderful, love it.
Yep, and then it modulates up a perfect fifth. So it's good. And then there's the timpani strokes. Boom, boom.
Brilliant. Love it.
Yeah, I don't know what to call that little bit of music, but we do hear that throughout the Rise of Skywalker. I don't think it's listed as maybe it is listed as a motif in the catalog.
I'm not sure. I mean, sometimes Frank sort of catalogues things under non-leitmotivic themes.
Right. So I'm wondering if it's an incidental motif.
And it could be an incidental motif. And they kind of go chronologically.
Yeah. Well, I don't see it, but I see a lot of ones that...
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when it's not included, it could be what he calls, I love this expression, a free-floating particle.
Particle, yeah. Yeah, so I think that's a free-floating particle.
Yeah, because although we might not necessarily hear it, again, it kind of, it's just so identifiable, when you hear it. But it's not sort of hackneyed either. I wouldn't necessarily have said I could have heard that in something else. I mean, I'm sure I have, but I can't immediately think of something that I have.
I think it is a succinct, and it's made more succinct and specific by its rhythm. Because just in general, like in isolation, having, for example, something with these 3 notes, or, that's not terribly unique, especially just kind of going like that. Like, none of these things in isolation are unique, but it's like the suggested pairing of these things, this with the timpani, with the rhythm, maybe makes it feel more unique.
Yes, and also it seems to emotionally go with what's going on, with what Rey says about her power and you don't know what's in me, sort of thing. It seems to just fit naturally, and I think this goes to when Williams writes underscore. When it's not a major theme or whatever, everything is so carefully thought out. And with everything, he always says, I think it is a quote where he sort of basically says it as if it should have already been written. It's already there, and it's just me kind of bringing it out of the ether, sort of thing. So it's always meant to be that way. That's how it should sound.
I think the space is also important in it. Vision.
Of the throne of the Sith.
Like it comes in and out.
And who was on it?
Yeah.
Ren.
And me.
This great transition here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, with a bit of filigree in the strings as well. We've got that nice...
Yep.
Yeah, lovely string filigree going on.
Yes.
By the way, that's a term that Tim Rodier came up with. Not
right,
me.
you mentioned that. I know.
Omni Music Publishing. He's a wonderful man. but it absolutely describes exactly what it is. It's sort of like little flecks of other things that sort of come in, a little swell of something. But yes, I mean, you know, da da dee da 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 becomes da 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 dum. You know, in a sense, it's sort of motivic development that it's just sort of part of a big run of something. Again, it's a technique that Beethoven used quite a lot as well. When you have a sort of melodic, let's say violin ones are playing a sort of melody over the top of something, but actually the main melody is in somewhere else.
Yeah. I'm also
Basically,
remembering
descant.
a descant. Is that what you said?
Yeah, basically.
Let me get a definition up. An independent treble melody. Oh, specifically, usually sung or played above a basic melody. Yeah.
Yeah.
Earlier in this movie, we also have something like that. I think when Palpatine, when they're saying somehow Palpatine returned, which feels
Yes.
related.
It does actually, and almost, I don't know how you feel about this sort of on the instrument. Do you think it's almost like drumming your fingers, like waiting in the sidelines? You know, almost, oh, hello, I'm about to appear. Like a sort of spider sort of weaving their web. And I wonder
It does
whether
feel a
that's...
bit like that.
It does. I mean, absolutely it does. And I wonder whether sometimes Williams sort of thinks of these things sort of almost onomatopoeically, as if it's sort of like, oh, you know,
Yeah.
sort of in this, literally. That's what he's doing on a piano, yeah, but on a violin, yeah.
Yeah. That's really funny.
Just so you have to turn your whole hand round in a different position.
Oh my gosh. So in lightsaber fights, let me think, how would that...
I'm not sure. I mean,
I like
but
the
he
spider
does
thing, though. That's good.
I don't know. Maybe it's a bit silly, but I mean, the choreography of where he puts music in the dialogue as well is also significant. I mean, it's never absolutely exact, but it doesn't need to be. It just allows enough space for the dialogue to appear, and then he says something else. Dialogue, a little bit of music, and again, it's a way of, you know, adding structure to the overall scene. It's incredibly clever. It really is.
Definitely.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, it's very easy also in the way that we write often in a DAW. Everything's gridded. And it's actually very hard to imagine that it shouldn't be gridded. You know, the tempo changes or the sort of BPM changes or little gradations of things. I mean, you know, a nightmare to record if there's a writ or an allegando or something. Hugely problematic. But they're filled with Williams, and I'm interested how much of it is very much clicked, and then how much of it isn't clicked because he needs to get to a certain marker point and then just sort of lets the orchestra do their thing. I don't
Yeah,
know.
because even though musicians will report that they barely use a click with him, I'm sure there are some instances where they have to. So I'm curious which parts they had
Yeah,
to.
which of those parts?
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Otherwise, he's conducting blind and sort of in an old school way of literally watching the film and sort of, you know, conducting towards that. And also the amount of time required when you've got, you know, the LSO or in this case, was it the Los Angeles
just the
orchestra? You know, in a room, sort of twiddling their thumbs, sort of go, come on, we need to get on and sort of do this thing. And by the way, the recording of this film is incredible. It really is. The clarity is absolutely amazing. Everything sounds so incredibly close and actually quite dry, but it isn't. It still sounds amazingly epic. How on earth is that possible to achieve?
Oh, I'm glad you've commented on that. Do you extend that compliment to the soundtrack too?
Absolutely, yeah, completely. You know, the way it's recorded is tremendous. Everything sounds so clear. There's a real clarity about the whole soundtrack. Just the way it's done is, but you know, in the old days, there's, you know, I'm so used to things being swathed in reverb, and actually, it's quite a dry sound. I mean, certainly the original Star Wars sound was very dry anyway. But I mean, even in their, the dialogue, there's a lot of echo and reverb in the dialogue, but there isn't in the music. It's a really interesting sort of like sound nightmare, I'd imagine, for any mixing engineer to sort of do the whole thing, the dubbing in the dub.
Yeah, shout out to the
Crazy.
score recordists and people who were involved in recording and mixing this score.
Yeah, absolutely. The other one to be commended was the last Indiana Jones one as well. That's an incredible recording quality.
Huh.
Just the way the strings are very, very present and very near. You just feel it, even without sort of Dolby Atmos as a system for us to sort of replicate, even just with, Apple iPods or something, or whatever, or your choice of any AirPods. It's really interesting the way orally it sort of works. It's just tremendous quality, I think. Phenomenal.
Yeah. I'm curious to get the take of, what's his name? The one who did the mastering. Let's see. Is his name? Why can't I remember? This is so embarrassing. Chris Malone, of course. Chris Malone. Oh my gosh.
Oh, yes.
Love to get his
of course.
take. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely want to pick his brain about all of the modern Star Wars scores. Okay, I'm going to continue playing.
Yeah.
We recovered the scavenger's ship, but she got away. Under command of the Knights of Ren, we suffered losses. The transport was destroyed.
Seen the report. Is that all?
No,
Rude.
General. There was another transport in the desert. It brought back a valuable prisoner.
Prisoner?
The beast used to fly with Han Solo.
I think that's a really
Amazing.
interesting choice to put the friendship theme there.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's sort of the what is it? Let's have a look at what Frank says about the
Oh, good
that
idea.
theme.
Yeah.
Because I think it's rather beautiful.
Yeah, I really like this theme. One of two thematic components of the Rise of Skywalker concert arrangement, a long-breathed and songful representation of the bond between Rey, Finn, and Poe specifically, and fellowship generally, perhaps the most sentimental of all Star Wars themes, resonates with multiple other leitmotifs and in conjunction with Victory has a summative, retrospective quality.
Yeah, wonderful. And it is like a sort of release, isn't it? It's like, oh, phew, thank goodness he's not he's not dead.
Yeah.
He's not dead, thank God. And also, I'm always amazed at the treatment of other species, let's call them, rather than races in Star Wars. It's sort of a D&D word now, isn't it? Species rather than race. But yes, what do you want with this beast? It's so sort of condescending and fascist, isn't it? It's sort of that sort of thing from the Empire where they treated all other non-humans as basically completely inferior, which makes them loathsome, of course, completely. And then to have that sort of lovely friendship theme that sort of completely, I wonder whether that is the reason why he's put it there, is that to delineate the contrast between this sort of appalling mentality and what we all feel about Chewie and friendship and camaraderie, because of course that's kind of very important later on in the film.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Well, Chewie doesn't have his own music, really, despite being, a mainstay of all of the films. But also, I feel like, at least what it means, I don't know that if this is the intention, but what the friendship theme there evokes for me is Chewie's relationship with Han Solo. So like the Beast used to fly with Han Solo, so I'm like remembering their friendship.
Yes, absolutely. It's a wonderful connotation. And also it seems appropriate because I think you can't really put the Millennium Falcon motif in there. It
Right.
doesn't really work that well. It sounds too jaunty. Yeah. It's too sort of, fun and exciting. And also, that friendship theme itself is a really interesting melodic design. The shape of it is sort of as a big wave. Would you be able to just bring it up again on the screen? So I love the bit in bar 3 and 4, measures 3 and 4, which just simply goes from C major to B minor. There's something incredibly sad about it, or wistful.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean...
And then I like the second time it does, it repeats that chord progression.
Yes, absolutely. And then goes a step higher.
Oops. Yeah, it is very wistful. That is a good word.
Yeah. And also what's interesting particularly about Williams is that there are always little marker points and little symmetries. So if you look at bar 2 and 4, measures 2 and 4, they're both falling intervals and long note values. Yeah. And they're sort of, they're the recessive qualities of the progressive qualities of bar 1 and 3. So bar 1, you've got a C sharp which is leading to A, and it's obviously, needs to resolve to, C sharp to D needs to resolve to that D. And then in bar 3, dee-da-dee-dum, has a feeling of rise towards the climax of bar 4. And then he continues it by then repeating bar 3. It's a really interesting way of generating melody because, yes, melody should have a certain balance of repetition and contrast. And I think Williams has managed to do both of those things incredibly well. I mean, what a brilliant theme to have. I mean, it might not be one of his most absolutely memorable themes, but it's still memorable enough, which I like. I mean, just a remarkable gift for melodiousness, if that is a word, I don't know. It is now, anyway.
Yeah, I think...
and also the chords, that it goes, da-da-dee-dim, dee-dim, that sort of major to minor as well, that it is that sort of wistful type of sentimentality.
Let's see if I can draw some of what you were talking about. There we go. Okay. So...
Oh, it's amazing.
Bars... Yeah, so this is what you're saying, bars... This is bar 2. It goes down.
So bars
here.
2 and 4 have a certain symmetry, yeah.
Yeah. Yep, long notes, and they fall.
They're sort of counterbalanced by the progressive nature of bars 1 and 3. Yeah.
I mean, and the same thing with 5 and 6.
And the same thing. So 5 and 6, yes, basically replicates 3 and 4, but in a slightly different way. So the chord hasn't changed, but we feel as though we've gone on a bit of a journey because instead of bum bum, it's just going up in the arpeggio of B minor, just chord tones.
Yep.
And then we get into a sort of Lydian territory, I think, after that, don't we? Sort of F sharps with C in the bass.
And the same basic shape.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, same basic shape. But the chords. Oh.
Yeah, so I think that's just gone up a third, actually, hasn't it? Major third?
Yeah, from G to B.
B major. Yeah, I mean,
three distinguishing melodic / harmonic features are the Lydian double neighbor in measure 1, like Yoda.
Yes.
Undulations between 4. Undulations between the subdominant 4 and minor 3 in measures 3 to 7, and modulation from antecedent to consequent phrase up a major third. Yeah. So the antecedent phrase would be this first part. The consequent phrase would be the second part. That's all.
Yes.
Like some other
and
extended
interesting
themes.
Yes, and I think that's interesting. Sorry, you're about to get to
Oh
it.
no, I was
I'll
just going to
cut you
say,
off.
I was just reading the rest. Like some other extended themes seems to be already developing when it starts. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what were you
Absolutely.
saying?
Well, no, I was just going to highlight that because I think that's really interesting. Already developing when it starts. Dee-da-da-da-da. Could be. Is there something that before that? And there isn't.
Right.
It almost feels as though you've gone into the middle of the phrase and that you've missed out the first bit of it, and that the first bit was sort of inconsequential. You don't really need that.
Yeah.
Which I find incredible. And actually, Ray's theme is a little bit like that. Da-dee-dee-da-da-da-dum. It sort of starts with something else. Dum-ba-da-da. It starts with a different motive, and so it gives rise to the next sort of thing. But yeah, it's just, his theme construction is just wonderful. And so when we hear it, there's a real sense of sort of all of that drama has sort of suddenly, we need that emotional punch to go, oh, thank goodness he's alive. It's a really lovely sort of warm hug of a melody that comes after. It's a Chewie hug, basically, isn't it?
It is a Chewie hug. And I promise not to make that the name of the episode. Okay, I'll continue playing.
Love it.
Roar.
Take it to interrogation 6.
It.
We've only got 8 hours left.
So what are we gonna do? What can we do? We gotta go back to base.
We don't have time to go back. We are not giving up. If we do that, Chewie died for nothing.
Oh, Chewie had the dagger.
Well, then we gotta find another way.
Well, there isn't. That was the only clue to the Wayfinder thing, and it's gone.
So true. The inscription lives only in my memory now.
Ah, 3PO. The way he says it is like, if it were any other character saying it, you'd be like, you're trolling me right now.
Yeah.
She's like, so true. Only lives in my
3PO's
memory now.
I mean, can we just have a moment about 3PO love? Because
Yes.
I love 3PO. I think he's just my favourite character
I love it.
in so many ways. He's just phenomenal. And actually, he's got a brilliantly comic part in the whole film as well.
Oh, for sure.
there's-
I'm so glad that he got to shine.
Oh, literally. I mean, absolutely. And it's got sort of quite a crucial sort of plot point in all of it as well. Without him, they literally have no way of sort of going anywhere else at all. That's it. That's the end of the road. Yeah, his whole sort of way that he voices things is just remarkable. I think Anthony Daniels is so clever.
I know.
With the way that he sort of gets his point across. It's incredible. Just perfect.
Yeah, Anthony Daniels is
Absolutely
a
perfect.
treasure. And since 3PO is very important to this plot, is very necessary, they need what 3PO has. They have to go along with whatever he needs to get there, even if it's
And
inconvenient.
he's so, and he's very forgiving. There's a bit, I think, isn't there, a bit earlier when they meet the snake, and he says, nobody asked whether if
Yeah.
I'm okay
Yeah.
or where I am.
Like, don't worry, I'm okay.
It's all right. I am here though.
Yeah.
That's good to know. It's wonderful. But I think there's in this film, I'm not quite sure what interaction Lando has with him later on, but I think he's a bit more respectful. This is General Calrissian. It's a bit more sort of. He's not sort of a scheming backstabber like he perhaps might have been perceived in a former film. But yes, I mean, great stuff. Love it.
Yep.
Love that little bit of dialogue.
Hold on. The inscription that was on the dagger is in your memory?
Yes, Master Poe. But the translation from a forbidden language cannot be retrieved. That is short of a complete redactive memory bypass.
A complete what?
It's a terribly dangerous and sinful act performed on
Sinful, I think that's a funny word.
and criminals.
Let's do that.
I know a black market droidsmith.
Black market droidsmith?
But he's on Kijimi.
What's wrong with Kijimi?
I had a little bad luck on Kijimi. But if this mission fails, it's all been for nothing.
And
all we've done, all this time.
music back in.
We're all in this.
More Octatonic.
Till the end.
For Chewie.
Hands.
Kind of a reharmonization of
Yeah.
the friendship theme. But
Yes.
yeah, you're
And
right.
is
A
it
little octatonic moment.
A bit of Octatonic moment. Is that bit just that we've just heard in clarinets and horns? It's quite difficult to hear.
Do you mean the friendship theme thing?
Yeah, just as it came right in the last little bit.
Okay, that is conveniently the beginning of the track To Kijimi on the For Your Consideration soundtrack. So I'll play it without the dialogue.
Okay. Oh.
Interesting. Huh, that was an interesting voicing.
Very, very interesting voicing because it's very middling. But the way he differentiates the melody from the harmony is that I think there are clarinets added to those horns, and the rest of the brass are sort of low brass, trombones, tuba, that sort of thing.
Oh, wow. I
so
can't even hear the
even-
clarinet. Wait.
Maybe it's just before.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah, I hear it. Oh, interesting. That does make it more clear.
Yes, just having that added sort of woodwind element is sort of differentiating it from the rest of the brass because it needs some other color to distinguish it. Otherwise, it's then sort of too masked by the harmony.
Yeah.
Very, very clever writing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind if we just listen to that once more?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So a classic cascade.
Yeah, and it's the DSCH out of order, too.
Dee-da-dee-dum. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Dee-da. It's EDSH. Yes. Yeah, Shostakovich has got his letters muddled up. But absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, it's there. And again, it's a bit of a cascade, so that sort of some instruments just stop on the second note, and then just sort of hang on, a bit like if you put a pedal down on a piano, and that you just played all of them as a chord.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, is there a word, it's sort of sustained, I call it cascade, I don't know why.
That sounds accurate. I don't know if there's a proper word for it.
I'm sure orchestrators have like a thing that they use for it. There's a lot of it in Lord of the Rings, where you get those sort of layers of things. And it's Prokofiev used it in Romeo and Juliet at the beginning of the Dance of the Capulets, for example. But it's just this sort of cascading, but everything else sort of sustains their pitch all the way through.
Yeah. I would, if anyone knows a name for that, I would like to know, because it is often in my notes as like sustain, add notes, like I never know how to describe it. So it would be great if I had a way to describe it more succinctly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
Okay, good. Okay, I'll play this again.
Whoa. That harmonic change is unbelievable.
The
But then going to the second chord is where is that from? I mean, that's just extraordinary.
Yeah.
I don't think it bears any relation to that first chord whatsoever. It's pure jazz.
Well, let's see.
Yeah. Boom, 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 boom. It's like a sort of chordal chord. Incredible. Then it resolves.
And it stalls on the D Actually, I think on the sound in the movie, is it? I wonder if they stall on the D for longer. No, they do stall on it. This is where they're waiting for Ray to join in on the "We're all in this," and it's sort of like stalling on one note while waiting for something is a common thing to do.
Yeah.
And this is for Chewie. Duh, that chord is so cool. Yeah. Oh, it's good.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
It is so good, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And
Really
that is the friendship variant. What we're
Friendship
hearing at the
variant.
end a little bit. Here, I'll lead into that again. I'll put it on screen. Yeah. So this is the friendship variant.
Yeah. In a compound time. Brilliant. Yeah, there's a lot of cross rhythm in there as well, isn't there? Dee dum ba bum ba bum ba. You know, all of that sort of stuff going on. Fantastic. Brilliant. Love it.
Yep. Okay, we're
Not
almost...
quite as complicated as. Sorry.
No. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say not quite as complicated as some of the Phantom Menace stuff. There was I was remembering a cue. I can't remember which one it is, but it's mad sort of, 2, 4, 3, sort of 3 plus 3 plus 2 over 8, and then something else. It's
in
just
Force Awakens.
Absolutely. In one of the Phantom Menace cues, just weird time signature bits.
Wait, did you say you said Maz and Ray?
Did I?
Yeah.
I think I meant the Phantom Menace. It's late here. Well, actually, it's not too late here, but
It's definitely later than here, so yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, there's tricky. Yeah,
Absolutely.
there are tricky things in that film for sure. Yeah, which you know very
Cool.
well. Okay, so we
yes.
have just a little bit left of the minutes, so I'll go back to that. Or about
Till the end.
For Chewie.
Hands. For Chewie.
Kajimi.
right into Knights of Ren. Back to friendship theme. And that's the end of those minutes.
It's amazing, isn't it, how he sort of juxtaposes two such completely different sort of, themes. And that's a massive skill, isn't it? Is that, often, as a composition student, I was always taught to kind of make sure that structurally things were separated out properly. Or that you bring in elements of what's to come into the first element in order to then make the transition smoother between the different structures. So that you bring elements of, let's call it 2 or B into A, and that you bring elements of A into B. But in this, it's very much a sort of like completely delineated block of sound. A sort of module, really, modular composition. Block of that, and then suddenly, whoa, what? What?
I'm thinking about the utility of such short themes or mottos. Like they can be more invasive without totally changing the direction of everything else.
Yes. And also it's a bit of a sort of, it's basically
It's like an
that,
intrusive thought.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And in this case, leitmotivic as well, so that we are reminded that actually people are still searching for them. Nothing's over, and actually they're in grave danger at all points. Yeah, it's especially from The Last Jedi, because that whole thing is honing in to their base, and suddenly they manage to escape, but it's like, just managed to. And so we perhaps still feel that might be a possibility at any given moment as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just think there's a huge sort of skill in juxtaposing very specific, because I mean, I've just finished a feature film myself, and there was no opportunity to kind of bring in something completely intrusive and different in a scene, because it just wasn't that sort of film at all. It was actually a romantic comedy, completely different. And often the time is that, a director will just sort of say, actually, I want this going all the way through, and you don't need, don't worry too much about sort of the nuance of getting it absolutely synchronized, because it's not that sort of cue. But there's a lot of stuff in Williams where it very much is to do with synchronization and specific thought, let's call them intrusive thoughts, like you did, where these sort of little particles of motives, or let's call modules, come in. And it has to be so well choreographed. I was told that the music was quite chopped up a lot in this film, but I don't know whether that's actually accurate or not. But
it seems like
I
it
don't know,
was
have
chopped.
you heard?
Yeah, I have heard that it's been chopped up, and that a lot of things were inserts or were not on. Like there's the speeder chase cue, which I talked about with Connor Power, I think a couple episodes ago. As of this recording, a couple episodes ago. That one is mostly not in the film, but like it's a whole basically like a whole scherzo for X-Wings type of piece that is a concert arrangement that is on the soundtrack, but is like not really in the film. But that I think for that there was a decision made to take out more of the music, and John Williams is usually like understanding about that. But yeah, there's so much music that I think was recorded later or tracked in, and certainly things were cut. And I think Frank Lehman has a lot to say about it. But I don't know for sure. Like I don't know if it's any more than perhaps Force Awakens or something, because I just don't know. I just know that the prevailing sense that people on the internet generally seem to have is that this film is much more chopped up, but also I don't have like empirical evidence to support that necessarily.
Yeah, same, absolutely. I mean, it sounds as though it probably was, just because I think, we're sort of conditioned to it from, the last whole sort of Act 3 of Phantom Menace. All of that was from the end credits. None of the Duel of the Fates was in the film until they put it in the film. It was all sort of end credits, and it was all sort of tracked in. And then Attack of the Clones, of course, was... Are you about to do this, by the way, that concert coming up soon?
Yeah, by the time...
the live reading.
By the time this episode comes out, the concert will have already passed, but there should be a link online to watch it now.
Fantastic. I can't wait.
Yeah.
I think that is a tremendous... What a brilliant idea. Who came up with that idea? What a brilliant idea.
The guys behind Star Wars Minute and the George Lucas Talk Show.
It's so
And they've got so many amazing people. They have, connections in entertainment and stuff. Like just the fact that the person who played Boba Fett is playing Boba Fett in it.
I mean,
is
phenomenal.
Yeah, it's great.
And when you do the music, are you doing it so that you... I'm sorry to sort of almost interview you.
No, please.
Sort of but is it that... How do you go about doing the music? Do you sort of like do it all by ear, or are you able to sort of write certain bits down and then sort of do links between the dialogue so that it's not always going on at the same time as they're talking? Or how do you choreograph it?
Yeah, so first... we spot the film and with the script that we're given. And kind of write, like, in general, where, like, I'll put a little thing up, kind of where things should go and, like, where it corresponds in the movie. So, I do this with Ender Smith, who's been helping me, who's been a guest on the show a few times. And he's takes more charge of the script. And then I take that and I go to the spots in the film and I do transcriptions by ear. And so it is, and then we go through the script together and we kind of like add text cues in there. So like you can see like that has stood for over 1,000 years to be split in two, and that's where I start this thing. And then, my goodness, you've grown is then I start this thing. So there are a ton of cues. We're not done yet, but we're up. I think we're going to have like about 60 or 70 cues maybe.
Amazing.
Yeah, just doing the coruscant chase was kind of a nightmare. Because what looks, and this is a lesson we learned from doing the Naboo movie first, the Phantom Menace, is we overspotted it because in the film there are some great pieces of music that are just during an establishing shot or something that in a live reading you're not going to get. So so sometimes we kind of fudge it where if like there are some pieces of music in Attack of the Clones where I'll be damned if I don't get to play it. Like there are just a few things that I really want to play. Like I really want to play the Thede Pastoral, even though we don't get an establishing shot in the live reading. But we found a place to put. I just wanted to play that, and I need to play like just from a performer perspective. It's just fun to play the pastoral. I just want to play the pastoral courtship.
Fantastic. It's such a good, it's amazing. I mean, it's so folk. I mean, it reminds me of a bit in Henry V, William Walton, which I know.
Right, you are an expert at.
Well, but I know John Williams sort of loves that film. And there's a whole scene of the French court, which is all very ornamented and very sort of pastoral as well.
I can hear that.
Yeah, fantastic. Lots of trills and mordants and all sorts of funny names that music theorists give to these just twiddles, basically.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Love it.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, it would be wonderful to have a sort of complete, proper score of the Rise of Skywalker. It's such a shame that it doesn't really exist anywhere. You know, I suppose we've got, those concert Hal Leonard things.
What are the Hal Leonard things? You mean the concerts?
So the concert series of cues and things from the various films.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Rather than the live to picture, score. Just because I think it's a shame not to be able to sort of study them and in real depth at this stage. Maybe it will become available at some point. Who knows? But it's. Again, a phenomenal piece of work. I mean, the whole film in The Rise of Skywalker just brings back so many themes. And it becomes incredibly emotional. I mean, that Leia theme at the end, Leia's theme and, of course, Luke and all of it. It's just, it's a bit of a weepy.
It is. Yeah. I was moved by the film, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I watched it recently just before... coming on this, and I'm just reminded by the emotional impact of everything, which sort of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning about things in pairs, this sort of dyadic thing, which I think is I don't know whether Williams sort of directly translated that musically, consciously. In other words, I don't see a pair of something necessarily. But but maybe that's just my inability to analyze it properly. But I'd be interested to see the duality of different sort of, is there a duality in some of the themes that we get to hear, or the ways that they're reharmonized possibly? It's just because in contrast to something like Lord of the Rings, where the ring motif has two chords, because it's the duality of the ring as sort of, enticing, but also evil. I'm not sure that Williams sort of does that with this particular film, because I don't think he sort of engages it with that, because you don't need to. It's in the film. there's no musical reason.
Yeah. Do you mean like light versus dark and things like that, Ray and Kylo?
or sort of counterpointing different sort of lines and threads at the same time, that sort of thing. I'm not sure to what extent there is that in the film, and that's in contrast with something like, let's say, Wagner's Valkyrie, where right at the end of the Magic Fire music, you've got, the theme from right at the beginning of the opera, that was 4.5 hours ago, Wotan's theme, Brunhilde's immolation theme, and you've got ba-dee-dum, bum, ba-da-dee-dee-dee-dee. Then you've got a big cello going dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dim, ba-da-dee-dim, ba-dum, dee-dee-dim, ba-da-dee-dee. All of these strands sort of come together. And I don't think Williams has sort of consciously gone in that direction, because that's not really the flavour of what Star Wars is about. So, and he achieves it in different ways. So, for example, at the end of Empire, it's just the Han and Leia theme, the love theme, even though we only see Luke and Leia. It's got nothing to do with it, but it's the emotive quality of it that gives us that sort of joy or sorrow, or emotional punch. And in this film, he uses those themes in very specific ways to sort of round off, here this is again, but I'm doing it because I have to do it. You can't have Leia on the screen and not have Leia's theme. It just that would make no sense. So you have to do it. But yeah, I mean, it could be both a slight criticism, but also simply an observation that because of the way the film's put together and the way it's constructed, is that you kind of feel compelled to put those sorts of things in, particularly right at the end as Rey makes a decision to go to Exegol and kind of confront the Emperor. And at that point, Kylo stroke Ben has sort of been redeemed. And it's interesting how that theme kind of gets completely obliterated, as if it never existed. It's amazing. Yeah. I mean, the musical challenges of that film are so tricky. I mean, I'd have no hope of sort of, solving them, I don't think. I mean, maybe I would, but I wouldn't feel confident about it at all. What a challenge to sort of bring it all together. All of that saga, because of course this is the last, the ninth film. The ninth film.
I know, over decades.
And, when Williams was writing in the 70s, look how far, things have come since then. But also his language has changed slightly. I think Phantom Menace very much had layers of sound, which we were completely unused to. I remember sort of listening to the Duel of the Fates transfixed, thinking, this is by Williams. Oh my goodness. Wow. Really? I mean, I was just, amazed. And then that's kind of stayed with him a little bit. I think Frank, in one of his chapters in various books, talks about the sort of Zimmerfication, possibly, of Williams in some ways. This sort of layering effects. And I think that it's a really interesting sort of observation about his work from, the 90s onwards, particularly with regard to Star Wars and how it all comes back. But I still think what an amazing achievement to still have created, Kylo's theme, Rey's theme, which I think is extremely popular in the fan base, particularly, especially sort of the musical fan base. So many people want to do arrangements of that theme.
I wish John Williams would I wish they would publish the violin solo. So someone other than Hilary Hahn can also
Anne-Sophie
play it.
Mutter. Yeah.
Or is it not Hilary Hahn?
Anne-Sophie Mutter.
Yeah.
Although I wouldn't mind Hilary Hahn.
Yeah,
playing
no,
it as well.
she can
fantastic.
do it. Yeah.
She certainly can. Sadly, I think she's at the time that we're recording this. Sadly, she pulled out of. Yeah, she's had an injury, I think, and so she's got to take some time to heal. But she's certainly a performer I'd love to hear. Live
I've seen her perform
as well.
Bach.
Oh, well,
That's very good.
joyous. Absolutely, and inspiring.
Regarding Williams's themes. Oh.
No, go for it.
Okay, regarding Williams's themes, I feel like they're more fuzzy. I mean, not all of them. Some of them are more, you see this, so you're going to get this. But I feel like they're maybe they're less specific and they're more emotionally, I think the emotion of them is probably what's most important about the themes. They seem fuzzier. Like they seem like the intent that we ascribe to them is always being expanded, the meaning of them. And maybe it's helped by the fact that Williams himself has never been like, these are the 10 themes that are in this film. So our guesses are their guesses. He could one day on his deathbed be like, actually, it was never supposed to be the Force theme. It was supposed to be the Hope theme or something. Like that is, it is possible. Not with that one in particular, but yeah, they do feel more fuzzy and flexible. And then I also think about like in the medium of film versus like a Wagner opera. Williams didn't know at the beginning that he was going to be doing 9 of these. It's harder to plant seeds that you're going to pay off 8 films later if you don't know what the scope of the whole work is yet.
Absolutely. And I think Frank made a point recently in an article which he wrote for
the Phantom Menace
magazine. Yes, which is that the Anakin's theme never really gets developed in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. In fact, I don't think it exists at all, actually, because it's associated with the Jake Lloyd version of Anakin, the young boy, the hopeful sort of person, but fearful and not really too sure about what's to come. Whereas, the Hayden Christensen Anakin is completely different. And so his theme has got to be different. And actually, it's more to do with generating a love theme between him and Padme, I think, at that point in Attack. And again, it's a really interesting observation that he makes. This is Frank. Because Anakin's theme is so ludicrously complex.
It really is.
I mean, incredible, really. And also still incredibly memorable. That's not fuzzy at all. That is a completely self-contained thing, not just because we hear it in the credits or on the original soundtrack or whatever, or album sort of versions of things, but because it's developed in the film to such a high degree.
Yeah.
Incredible piece of music. And just every skill that Williams had went into that theme.
That was a hero theme for sure.
Absolutely.
It takes up a lot of space in the catalog because there's a lot to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all based on fourths as well. So yes, I think, because it's got sort of bigger intervals, there's more scope for something. Whereas, Kylo's theme, there's not much scope because it's designed as a theme for somebody who's inadequate, as you were saying right at the beginning of the of this episode. Is that it has to be a little bit disappointing in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still incredible. I mean, I don't think the theme's disappointing, but the design of the theme has to not quite be as homogenous as the Imperial March, for example. It can't be. It's a poor reflection, so it wouldn't work otherwise. I mean, we still get things like the Emperor's da-dee-da-dee-da-dum And with that bum ba dum bum bum, but instead of da dee da dee da, which is just a version of bum ba dum bum bum, an amazing sort of, Hackney cliche from the 1910s, from vaudeville theatre, which is then suddenly transformed into.
I hadn't made that
sort of
connection.
lots of
That's
old.
funny.
Well, I mean, that's a connection that I make with it,
Okay.
but I don't know whether that's a thing or not. But I can just sort of imagine sort of lots of mumbling old age people going.
I mean, yeah, you're not.
Lots of vibrato. Sort of
That's really
decrepit
funny.
emperor.
Yeah, that's really funny. And now I'm not going to not hear it.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I'm so sorry for ruining that theme now. But yeah, I mean, I think the one theme is the friendship theme, I think. I mean, I think that sort of becomes almost, would you perhaps say that's almost the emotional heart of the Rise of Skywalker in some ways? I think probably the most memorable one. Because everything else we've heard before, the March of the Resistance and all of that sort of stuff as well.
The other one that I really like, I think the Psalm of the Sith is somewhat memorable, but like only from the soundtrack, really.
Yeah.
And I really like that one. But then the other theme that I actually really like is the victory one, which is just the Rise of Skywalker one.
Yes.
I think this is actually a really beautiful theme. Or whatever rhythm. Yeah, it's very good.
It is, and actually unusual for Williams that it's all quarter notes at the beginning.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Because so often he won't do that. There'll be, at least 2 or 3 different rhythmic values in the first sort of 2 or 3 bars, and he doesn't do that. It's very strident.
Yeah. Although it's not always quarter notes, but I see what you're saying. It's like a whole 5 bars. Yeah.
It's quite unusual.
Yeah, I think it is. I think the friendship theme and the victory theme are both very earnest. I've been saying this season, where I feel like they're very earnest and sentimental, and I feel like it's actually really difficult to write music that is earnestly sentimental and have it not just be cheesy and kind of just not as good as the other stuff. And so I'm actually very impressed by those 2 themes.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I've just noticed that bar 3 is the same as bar 1 in the victory theme. It's just that the final G is just going up an octave.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, this sort of symmetry that Williams has is really remarkable.
Yeah, the symmetry, for sure.
So, if we compare bars 1 and 3, we've got, that symmetrical design. It's just instead of the G going down or from the D, it goes up.
Versus.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then bars 2 and 4 are sort of reasonably closely related because of the 3rd and 4th beats, where we have a C going to a D, and then in bar 4 we have an E going to an F sharp.
Minor 7th.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, which is an unusual interval for Williams, actually, a minor 7th.
Yeah.
There are very, very few minor 7ths in the entire franchise, I would say. And you could probably put them on 2 hands in
That's a bold
all 9
statement.
films. Well, I mean, I've looked at 3, and I've gone
that's
through
true. That's
3
true.
entire films, and I've probably seen literally about 3 or 4 minor 7th chords, and that's it.
That's fascinating. Is it usually minor 7ths in? Does it feel like a utilitarian functional thing?
I don't.
Like.
Yeah, I mean, it would be that rather than any sort of chordal function. So it might be present in a melody, but certainly not as a harmony.
Mm-hmm.
Almost always it's a sort of he likes
Major
sort of
seventh?
half dim, major seventh, absolutely, sort of half dim chords, those sorts of chords which Mark Richards calls an 0811.
The half dim?
No, it's another chord.
So that's
so
half
if you
dim.
that's a half dim. So if you put your thumb on the middle C, and then play a G sharp and a B. There we go.
Oh, I see.
that
Okay.
chord.
0811. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The pitch class.
So they're filled with that sort of thing. But literally, just a minor seventh chord is so rare as to be virtually non-existent.
Yeah.
In Star Wars, it just isn't the sort of thing. And funnily enough, the same in Lord of the Rings actually as well. No minor seventh chords at all.
Why do you think that is?
I've absolutely no idea at all. I really don't know. It's quite a sort of, it's so jazz. And unless it's an actual jazz score, I just don't think it kind of works as a thing. It doesn't really speak sci-fi to me, or fantasy for that matter. If you just play it now in any inversion, with an E flat, but yeah.
With an E flat? Do you want to do it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you add the E flat to it as well.
Oh. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see what I mean? It just doesn't sound in any way sci-fi at all.
Okay, a lot of John Williams's music doesn't sound sci-fi though. It doesn't sound overtly
That's
sci-fi.
true. That's true. But yeah, I mean, even in sort of things like Harry Potter or stuff like that, I don't. Again, sort of minor seventh chords, very rare. Can't think of any particular cue that has about. I'm sure somebody will now go. Actually, Dom, there are loads in Catch Me If You Can. Yes, that's a jazz score. Of course, there'll be quite a few in there. But yeah, I mean, in the stuff that I've heard, very few. It doesn't really sort of speak as a sci-fi chord.
That's really funny to me. Have you heard of Symmetonics?
No, I haven't.
It's a what would I call it? It's a way to visualize the emotions commonly associated with certain intervals or chords or whatnot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so Symmetonics.web.app, and someone who, a former guest of the show, Dennis Ham, who plays piano, he did an episode in The Empire Strikes Back for the asteroid field, created it. He's a jazz guy, so it is really interesting to just you can hook up a MIDI controller and just play a bunch of notes, and it'll show different emotions associated with those intervals. And actually on his episode, we did a test where he went through all the intervals and was saying was asking me and listeners really to say what emotions they associated with it. And I think minor seventh felt very felt very hopeful and very kind of striving and stuff. It was really interesting, really interesting to think about, and then to think about how changing the tonal center can influence that. Which tonal center do you hear when I play these notes? Stuff like that.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I mean, that minor seventh, as soon as you play it, I just go, ba-dee-da-da-da. I just keep thinking of that. It's just the only thing I can think of. So yeah, hopeful.
Yeah. I mean, I hear dominant sevenths when I hear a minor seventh.
It's so interesting.
I wanted to ask you about one more thing, which is regarding those themes that we've talked about at the beginning of this episode that have so much villain music has repeated stuttering notes with maybe half-step movement or like augmented second or something. And this is in not only the Kylo Ren, Knights of Ren, stuff in the Acolyte was doing that too, where there's lots of like, what is it about that? I don't know if it's a trope, a musical language, if it's a John Williams thing.
I think it is a bit of a trope. I think Tag would call it a mus-eme.
Like a meme, a musical meme.
A musical meme. It's sort of it's like that. Yeah, ban-dee-da-dum is another one that they're sort of going either the neighbouring notes either side of a repeated pitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely in Harry Potter, isn't it? I mean, it's just a sort of particular one.
And that's in Attack of the Clones.
So, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, and interestingly, not in something like Alien. I want to say sort of Jerry Goldsmith. I'm not sure I sort of get those sorts of connotations. Although there are sort of interestingly, in a lot of that particular score, seconds, fourths, sevenths, and ninths. In other words, all the dissonances. There's no consonants at all. That sort of new prologue that's in the film starts with a major seventh, then a fourth, then a minor ninth, then a major second, then a major seventh again.
Wait,
it just doesn't have any consonants. Major seventh.
Seventh?
And then play an E and an A, so a fourth.
Or should I add them above?
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, that's perfect what you did. And then if you play the lower B and then a C at the top, and then a C, yeah, and then an E and an F sharp inwards. And an E. Yeah, and then go back to the major seventh. Yeah. That's it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fingers to put down.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
It's like a Whose Line Is It Anyway sort of musical improvisations in the game, isn't it? It's extra. Play this and that, So, yes. I mean, just no consonants at all, which is really disorientating. But I don't think it's sort of based on semitonal stuff. And interestingly enough, that whole chord at the beginning is actually a massive whole tone scale based on sevenths, just piling sevenths on each other all the way up the scale, basically, which is really interesting. Yeah.
Okay, I get it now.
Going.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know what it is about it. I think it is a form of trope or a sort of museum or a sort of a cliche of some description, but also the repetition of the note as well.
Yeah, that's another.
It's sort of like a teeth chattering type of sound, or a sort of gritting your teeth or grinding your teeth type of thing. It's sort of like a knocking at the door of consciousness. Yeah. And
it's like the invasiveness. It's like the.
It is. It's an invasion of sound, definitely. But yes, I mean, even with things like Imperial March, dum bum bum, there are 3 repetitions, bum ba bum, and then it repeats, bum ba dum. Even that in a very sort of elongated version is the sort of a similar idea. I always get fascinated as to how Williams comes up with his ideas. And I think, I know for a fact that they don't just come unbidden into his mind and he just writes it down, apart from the Harry Potter thing where he did think of it at the end of a dinner, wrote it down that evening, sent it to, the producer and the directors the next day, and they went, yep, that's it. That's the theme.
You mean like the Hedwig's theme?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
He literally just wrote that out. But everything else, those 5 notes for Close Encounters took months to do.
Going back and forth.
And weeks
Spielberg.
and weeks. Absolutely. And I reckon the Han and Leia theme from Empire must have taken a long time as well, because hold a sec, I did a theme for Leia, but now I've got to do another theme for Leia and Han. Oh no.
And then one for Leia and Luke.
How do I do that? Yeah, exactly. and the fact that he works at them incredibly hard, and it must be that, like a chess game, you go through all the permutations of something. Once you've sort of highlighted the vague feeling of what you want it to do, that you work hard at sort of going, should it be that note? No. Should it be that note? No. Should it be that note? No. Should it be that note? Should it be that note? No. And gradually you funnel the decision making down to what it needs to be, how it should sound, as if it's already there, that it was always meant to be that
I would love to know more about his revision process and how many versions of things he goes through, because it's easy to just look at the final product and assume that it just came out that way. And I really want to know what he tweaks, what isn't sufficient, and what he does another pass at.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a good case in point, actually, with the theme from Rogue One, which is a reversal of the main Star Wars theme. And it to my mind, it doesn't really work. Because it doesn't do what it should be doing. Part of it is a problem because of the memory associated with the original theme. It's very hard to check. I mean, I remember a Viennese pianist sort of going, "Happy Birthday should not be written like this. It doesn't work in the right sort of way. It should be this, and it should go to this note, and blah blah blah." But that's not as memorable. Yes, it should do theoretically, but it still doesn't work. Because you're fighting against something that everybody knows.
Yep.
In other words, if you change the notes of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, it doesn't sound like Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It sounds like a poor reflection of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It just simply won't work. You can't do that. It doesn't work because each melody is not just the notes. It's also the rhythmic value. It's the way they're played. It's what they're played on. It's the dynamics that they're played at, the speed that they're played at, the tempo,
the direction that the note is approached.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you can't change that form of revision of an existing art form cannot possibly work. That's the same as sort of drawing lipstick on the Mona Lisa or drawing in eyebrows or something. It's just you're not going to make it any better. It won't improve it. It can't be that way. And so each design of melody or thematic design has to follow the rules of that specific way that you produce those notes at the beginning. Otherwise, it won't work. And so I think what Williams does probably is he works at that design and then tries to get it as absolutely accurate as he can by not using a model for anything else. And I know, that there's a lot of, but it sounds a bit like this and that bit sounds a bit like that from there. And yes, of course, yes. But it's not. It does. Yes, it might do to you, but it isn't. It's got its own design. The main theme is not King's Row at all.
I was just thinking about that. Yeah. It
just isn't. At all. So, I mean, you go on. So the point is that each theme is developed in a very sort of thorough and technical way, which I think Williams prefers people not to see because, it's part of the mythology of the composer, isn't it? I think there's an element of that. A bit like Stravinsky. I think Stravinsky was a bit like that as well and sort of was reticent about explaining his craft to other people. I don't think Stravinsky took students. John Williams certainly doesn't take students. I don't think he's taught anybody. Very different from somebody like Goldsmith, who I think he taught at UCLA for a long time, didn't he, or USC and stuff. And they were teachers. They were people who imparted information. I don't think John Williams is that sort of character because I don't think he has the time. I think
now that you mention it, I haven't heard it. Yeah.
I think he would be fantastically good at doing it, but just because you're good at something doesn't mean you should do it as a career at all. And I'm sure that would take him away from the art form itself. He would be conflicted with worrying about students and what they're doing, and then concentrating on getting a theme absolutely accurate as possible. But I suppose with both The Last Jedi and this Rise of Skywalker film, part of the good thing is that you've got some themes already there because of the previous film. So you don't have to completely invent absolutely everything. There's some things still there that you can kind of develop. Going back to a little bit about what you said about how themes are developed from film to film, when he first did the first one, he wasn't really sure about what was going to happen after that. And so developing seeds in something for them to be reworked wasn't necessarily something that he kind of knew about. But I think it's a very challenging thing to come up with a complete theme and then somehow develop that theme again into something else. I mean, extremely difficult. I mean, not even Wagner was able to do that. I mean, they're Leitmotors, they're still Leitmotors. They haven't really been transformed completely. I suppose the only possible sort of analogy is Berlioz's Harold in Italy, which does go through a period of transformation of that little motto theme. Almost
I'm not
like
super
a sort
familiar
of
with that
variation.
one, actually. Okay,
it's a sort of motto theme that just gradually gets a little bit transformed, or a sort of variation technique, let's say, in something like the Goldberg variations, where you've simply got a chord progression and you can do sort of whatever it is over the top, or the famous Bach chaconne for solo violin, where you sort of simply vary your harmony all the time. But that's not a technique that Williams uses at all, really, in that way. I suppose the one exception to that is the Force theme, where it has that sort of bum bum bum, but it's still the same notes, really. That they haven't been developed into something else.
Right. You mean turning it into the metal ceremony music? Yeah.
Yeah. It's not really. It doesn't. There's no similarity between da da dum da da dum to da da da. It doesn't really bear too much relation to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Frank Lehman has done a talk that's on YouTube about thematic transformation, and he talks about specifically this part in The Last Jedi. I'll link it in the show notes. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And basically he does concur that the types of transformation, like there's not a ton of super like true transformation. There's like variation and there's other stuff, but he posits in that talk, which is years old now, that one big example of it actually happening is in The Last Jedi when Holdo crashes the ship. And he hears a transformation of the pretty, I don't know, blink and you'll miss it, tension motif into something else. And he lays out his case for why he thinks that is related and why it's a transformation. So it's a pretty interesting talk. Yeah.
Absolutely. And in order to have even done that, the amount of research that you would have had to have, it is mind-boggling, really. I wonder whether by the time this goes out that Frank will have finished most of his book, which he's doing on the whole saga, which is extremely exciting.
Yeah.
That's definitely going to be something which is worth every cent.
Oh, absolutely. Very looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Anyway,
great stuff.
The themes from these minutes were Kylo Ren A, aggressive, Kylo Ren B, hesitant, friendship, the friendship variant, and the Knights of Ren. I don't know which form. Slow form is definitely one of them, and then there's one that's, I don't know, they both sound similar enough that I'll just say Knights of Ren. None of the music from the set of minutes is on the original soundtrack, but the music is on the For Your Consideration soundtrack, so that would be track 5, A Prisoner, and track 6, To Kajimi. And now the last thing we have to do is the Star Wars Music Minute Questionnaire. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Do you want me to give you your previous answers first or after you give your new answer?
Oh, you can give them after. I'm probably virtually the same. No. I think
it would be funny if you said.
I've done different ones.
Okay. Question number 1. In exactly 3 words, what does Star Wars sound like?
Symphonic, complex, multi-layered.
Nice. Last time you said transporting, transforming, and transcendental. So you took a different approach this time.
I took a different approach this time, yeah. I mean, it is symphonic, it is complex, and it is multi-layered, basically. Yeah. But I like it. You hit the emotional things last time, and you're now more descriptive. Okay. Question 2. What is something related to Star Wars music or sound that you want to learn more about? I am doing a study at the moment of how the orchestrators of Star Wars voice John Williams's woodwind specifically, and brass. So, for example, in the sketch material, it might just be a chord of 4 notes. And so I'm interested in what is the decision-making process where the orchestrators choose what instruments each of those notes goes to.
Oh.
Because I don't know whether to what extent they rely upon sort of just normal orchestrational things like, where is it in the register of the instrument? Will it speak well? Will that note sound overpowering with something else happening over it? Etc. All of that decision-making process that orchestrators already use anyway, is it in the right range of that instrument? If it's too low for the flutes, nobody will hear it, so don't put it in the flutes. So I'm really interested in getting to the bottom of that. And I have a friend who is working with Conrad Pope at the moment. So I've sort of fielded the question via him to Mr. Pope to see whether we'll get a response. So I might actually have an answer.
Oh, I really want to know. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is definitely something I'm really keen to find out.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, I want to know too. Previously, you said that you want to talk to John Williams about what his teachers taught him.
Yes.
And still,
God,
yeah.
wouldn't it be amazing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Flying
and finally, what is a score or soundtrack that you're fond of besides anything Star Wars?
Well, I said Lord of the Rings last time, and I'm going to keep with Lord of the Rings because I've done a little bit of work on it again, and it is so different in style to John Williams. I mean, just completely the opposite way of conceptualizing the music and orchestrating it. It's really interesting, but it's so memorable. It just works so well with the film. And I did the Beacons of Gondor, I think, in one of my episodes sort of a few weeks ago. We're talking in 2024 in the summer. And it is somewhere on YouTube, and hopefully it will remain there. But that was really interesting to see how that specific cue happens, because it's an epic moment of the film where you see these beacons lit, and then it's a huge montage of these mountains just sort of gradually stacking up, where you just see the little flame in the distance suddenly of these sort of snow-peaked mountains gradually working its way, and you can almost see the sort of the whole night sky changing into daylight as Aragorn sort of suddenly throws his pipe out. I'm not sure he's smoking at that point, but sort of sees the Beacons of Gondor lit, and it's just the most magical, transformative music or transportative music that you can imagine. Beautifully rendered, very clear, very the clarity of it. The string playing is wonderful as well. Just all of those digga 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 digga, probably reasonably straightforward to play, so you can really get your bow into it and scrape it on the string as fast as possible. Just for the sheer energy is definitely a score I'm really fond of and always will be.
Are you a fan of all of the Howard Shore Lord of the Rings, or specifically?
Well, this was an interesting thing. I was hoping you would ask me this, because I was sort of thinking of an answer, because it's a bit like, is Gotterdammerung better than Die Valkyrie? Is The Return of the King better than the Fellowship of the Ring? No, I mean, they're all brilliant.
You consider it
in their own ways.
one ring cycle, basically.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, And sort of the same with Star Wars. I mean, I think Eric Whittaker posted an interesting thing on his Facebook recently. And again, we're talking the summer of 2024 here.
This will be out.
Where he... Yeah, but it's going to be... But, this might be people watching this in 10 years' time. You know.
Oh, yeah, true.
And let's hope so. I'm going to be in my 60s in 10 years' time, for goodness sake. I mean, that's just a frightening thought.
If you're watching this in 10 years, leave a comment. If comments are still a thing, I don't know.
Maybe you're still alive? ?
No,
That's for me anyway, not you. But it's sort of I've lost my train of thought there. No, it's
Eric Whittaker's Facebook post.
Yes, and he put things like Empire Strikes Back and New Hope, all the sort of things that you would expect to have. Interesting, I think he put A New Hope ahead of Empire Strikes Back. I would have it going the other way, simply because he wrote Empire Strikes Back within 2 months, like literally from spotting to the completed recording.
Right.
I mean...
It doesn't even make sense.
No, and like we've both studied this film in forensic detail.
Yeah.
I mean, that is... Well, actually, it probably took less time than just simply discussing the film.
Yeah.
Once a week with your guests.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy to think of that, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, just absolutely unbelievable. And so I would probably put Empire above A New Hope, simply for the fact of the speed of writing, the fact that such memorable themes. I mean, Imperial March, Yoda, Han and Leia. What? I mean, do we need any more? The asteroid field. But one of the greatest cues ever written for any film, probably. Funnily enough, I wrote a string quartet version of it. I can't find anybody to play it because it's so hard. It's virtuosically
I want to look at
hard.
it. Can you send it to me? I want to look at it.
I will send it to you, absolutely, yeah. If
Cool.
if you can play it, I'll be really impressed.
Yeah,
And
I
by
need
the
to
way,
learn
I'm
the
very
cello.
happy to revise it. Yeah. I'm very happy to revise bits that don't work because I need to probably go through it. But I will send it to you. Why not?
Thank you, yeah.
But with Lord of the Rings, I mean, very difficult because there are bits of each film which you would love to sort of collect. I mean, Fellowship from simply the Hobbit theme is just brilliant. And of course, the Ring theme. I mean, that comes in right at the beginning. Two Towers, that whole battle sequence of Helm's Deep is just unbelievable. And Return of the King with, the Beacons of Gondor and the Pelennor fields as well. And Shelob, all of that sort of really extraordinary aleatoric writing and lots of tone clusters and things like that. Very difficult. I don't know. I can't decide.
Yeah.
I'm not so happy about the Hobbit music. I think that was less successful.
Did Howard Shore do that as well?
Yes. He did. Perhaps there was less time to do it. And I don't know. It's just, there are bits of Stravinsky that are less successful than Rite of Spring and Petrushka. So it's not really a hard criticism when you've produced godlike work before, Yes, I just don't think they're quite as successful films generally anyway as Lord of the Rings. And so somewhat unfairly, the music probably suffers from that conception.
Yeah, that often
happens.
Yeah, they often go hand in hand. My funny Hobbit story is that I hadn't seen, when Hobbit was out in theaters, I didn't know much about Lord of the Rings. I had seen a couple of them. I'd fell asleep during one of them. And my dad had never seen any Lord of the Rings, didn't even know what Lord of the Rings was. But my dad has this thing where he likes to watch movies if he's heard that they've had a really big budget. So he took my brother and I to see The Hobbit. My dad, he fell asleep during most of it, but then at the end he was like, was that about a dragon? That was his takeaway from The Hobbit, was that it was about a dragon.
I love it. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes. That's incredibly funny. But also, with, Bear McCreary sort of taking over the Rings of Power as well. I mean, what what an incredibly hard thing to do. And I think we need to have a bit of a shout out, or please can I have a shout out to Michael Abels
Oh,
for the
yeah.
Acolyte music, because I think that was genuinely one of the most exciting scores I've heard for Star Wars.
Oh, I've been saying that too.
Since like some of the games. I mean, absolutely incredible. He made it sound like Star Wars without using or referencing any Star Wars themes.
Yeah.
How is that possible to do? I don't know. And you know, the use of those two cellos, particularly in the credits, I think in the first 2 or 3 episodes. I know you've done a lot of work on this, but you know, to show the twin size of this sort of dyad itself, you know, in the Force as well, with the twins, that we suspect are probably created by Plagueis, probably, but we don't really know.
Really?
It could be Plagueis working behind the scenes with, you know, the witches to sort of are they called witches in the series or not? It has a
think they are-
connotation, doesn't it?
I think they are witches. I feel like that term has been used, but I don't know if.
Yes.
I think so, but I'm not exactly sure now.
But Michael Abels, I mean, what an incredible achievement. So a composer to come into a franchise and then just sort of go, okay, I'm going to do the thing that you want me to do, but I'm going to do it my own way. What a remarkable achievement. I mean, I mean,
same.
When I was
that
on
score
when I was on Twitter, I just sort of waxed lyrical about it, because I just thought it's such a fantastic achievement. And you know, I imagine that there was a whole team of people sort of working on it, but doesn't diminish the achievement of it. I just think it's some of the best music I've heard. Lots of people don't like The Acolyte, but I really enjoyed it, actually.
I enjoyed it too.
I enjoyed the whole thing. It was
Yeah,
good.
I
It
enjoyed
was
it too.
refreshing. It was different. It felt kind of a little bit like the feeling that I had sort of reading sort of Old Republic comics and things like that, sort of, you know, centuries before the Battle of Yavin. I think that's always the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought it
similar
was very.
feeling.
Yeah, it was something fresh for me too, and I like the explorations of the Force, and of course, having the music being so stellar, of course, increased my perception of it.
Absolutely, it makes such a huge difference. And you know, it's interesting having just finished my first ever feature film, you know, as a composer, in terms of sort of long length thing. Hopefully, it'll be out this year. It's called A Near Miss.
Oh, cool.
So we've found a sales agent, so hopefully it will be sold to somewhere. But it was a really interesting experience doing it, because it was the first one I've done where, you know, I also had to write sort of 60 odd cues, and also take on the music supervising responsibilities to sort of try and find things that we could license if possible.
Oh, wow.
Which was extremely difficult to do with no budget, you know. But it was just a really interesting experience working with the director and coming up with the conceptual design of the score in the first place, and then spending time to actually then do it. You know, it's hard. It's hard work. And it's interesting, sort of, I got into a routine of, you know, waking up early in the morning, exercise, breakfast, coffee or tea, work, lunch, stop, work, supper, maybe work a little bit later, stop.
Oh, wow.
And taking enough breaks so that you could then think of something for the next cue. I mean, fortunately with that particular film, you know, a lot of the themes could be varied. So there was a lot of variation going on with things and reharmonization rather than inventing whole swathes of new material, which just wasn't really appropriate for the film. Partly because the temp track referenced similar pieces of music. And so then it made sense to kind of do a similar thing. And I think, you know, lots of composers sort of complain about temp tracks, but actually I find it pretty helpful. And that when you don't have a temp track, I often then create a temp track for it anyway. Because I want to try and go, well, what would work with that?
Right. Because you want to know if you're writing something in the right ballpark. It's
exactly
very laborious to just take a shot in the dark and then have to do it again.
Yeah. And I remember on the commentary of the old DVD of The Gladiator, or The Gladiator, the very first film with Russell Crowe. There's an interesting interview with Hans Zimmer at the end, and he says something along the lines of, I always find it very, very difficult to, get started on something and whatever. But music that works. Oh, suddenly my microphone went off. But music that works should always feel appropriate to the film. I love that word. I think that works really well.
Appropriate. Yeah.
Absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah, that is
and
good.
And when scores don't work for a film, it's usually because they're not quite appropriate. It doesn't quite gel, possibly. But
yeah,
anyway,
the appropriateness of the score is a whole other metric, not just whether it is a good score, whether it is good music. Since the Olympics are on now, I'm thinking about in gymnastics, there's a D score, which is the difficulty score, and then there's an execution score, and they combine to make the total score. And that's why something like Andor, which the music is more simple. When I listen to the music of Andor in isolation, just the soundtrack, it's not terribly interesting to me, but it's so appropriate for the show.
Absolutely.
The marks just really go up because of how appropriate it is for the show.
Absolutely.
So then I know I do like the score because it is so appropriate for the show.
Absolutely. And really, it shouldn't really be taken away from the film. It's sort of a little bit unfair on composers, I think, sometimes.
I think so.
Sort of literally take it away. And I know with that sort of, RCP, often they write suites and then somebody else sort of chops it up and edits and whatever. Yes, that is a way of working quickly. It's not a way I personally like to work, because I much prefer to work with the picture because the pictures themselves inspire me. But sometimes you don't have that luxury. I was told that when Zimmer was doing Dunkirk, he didn't have access to much of the footage at all. So it's working in the dark. It must be so difficult to do that. I can't imagine how hard that is, actually. Just
could be
sort of working
too.
off script or something. Yeah, exactly. It must be very, very difficult. But the whole sort of conception of something, or the way that you conceptualize film is very well delineated in Andy Hill's book, which is called The Secret Language. What's it called? Film. Scoring the. I was just reaching over to find it. Scoring the Screen.
Okay, cool. I'll put that
Andy
in the
Hill.
shows.
It's a phenomenal book because it deals with the conceptualization of something. So that will be characterization, the sound world, the history of it, where it's set, the geography. All of those sorts of choices are then used to create a specific type of score. And so things as disparate as Perfume or The Matrix, all of those sorts of things, or a Mika Levy score, for example, phenomenal composer. So all of those, I think, are really interesting. Gonnersdottir, who plays the cello, a lot of her inspiration comes from the way that she plays the cello and the sounds that she can get and generate from them, inspire her to then create the scores for the various films that she does. Of course, it absolutely stands to reason that would be a helpful device. And it could be that as composers, maybe we should perform, instead of sort of sitting in front of the door, maybe we should be playing the fiddle or the guitar or whatever it is that you happen to have, or the human voice.
The fingers are great inspirers, is the Stravinsky
fingers are
quote
great
you told me.
inspirers. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it's so true. And I think then that's a way that you get your individual voice as well, because that's the way that you play that particular thing.
Yeah,
and I've seen,
I couldn't agree more.
I saw a harpist friend of mine who is amazing, called Amy Turk. She's got, hundreds of thousands of followers basically on YouTube. And I once saw her do a concert where she only played the pedals of the harp. She didn't do anything else. like a sort of ostinato going boom, boom, and you could just hear the pedal resonance swaying to and fro, and then played this sort of like piratey sort of sea shanty basically. And I just thought, oh my word, that is amazing. Right, I'm going to use that in a harp piece, and I'm going to write one for you. And so I did.
That's really cool.
And literally just the way that you play something can be, you know, really unique, and it's your way of doing it. And so therefore you have a voice because it's your way of doing it.
Yeah, that
Anyway.
drives so much of the way that I try to compose, for sure. Yeah, and that's what I can hear it in other people's work, and it is delightful to hear. And I feel like it's sometimes obvious, like when you can tell sometimes, like, oh, this is the composer's instrument or something.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, isn't it interesting that with Williams, there's not a massive amount of piano going on
Yeah,
in anything,
that's very
actually.
true.
But I see figurations of pianistic figurations in a lot of work that he does. So, for example, if you put your thumb on middle C, third finger on A flat above, and then your fifth finger on the C above, I just call that the Brahms. And you find it in string writing all the time. So violin 1, violin 2, viola will do that figuration. And it's all over the Phantom Menace or Attack of the Clones or virtually any piece that he's written.
Interesting.
That figuration is so common. And, you know, I've seen it in Brahms' Intermezzi, for example, is that figuration of literally putting your hand on the keys in that way. And I wonder whether that's, you know, possibly the way that he plays them is leads to that. But it's also a particularly good string quality as well, because the notes never exceed an octave between either of them. And so it will always sound homogeneous. As soon as you go past an octave, then it's a bit more problematic, unless it's just a thematic unison.
That's interesting, the Brahms. Cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to say what you're going back to your favorite scores, your soundtrack scores that you are fond of. Last time you said Lord of the Rings also, and then you said Doctor Who, the Murray Gold. You said the Orville TV series. Yeah, and you called out the main theme too, and The Death of Stalin, Christopher Willis.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll still stick with all of that. Definitely. I'll probably put Rings of Power in there now.
Okay, cool.
And The Acolyte. Why not?
Oh, that's Star Wars.
Oh, it's still Star Wars, isn't it? Damn it. Oh, can't get away from it. Yeah. I'm trying to think of anything else that I've sort of heard which sort of really hits me. I think Rings of Power is just an extraordinary achievement. You know, again, I mean, the amount of time or limited amount of time that McCreary must have had to do that is.
Did you see his blog post about it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, the score for Oppenheimer is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen the video of him talking about the music, and I still don't quite understand how they recorded it. He's explained it, but I still don't understand how.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Now I want to find out.
Because they changed the BPM, but the BPM changes within the cycle of notes all the time. So you've got two different cycles going on, a bit like, you know, Terry Riley clapping music or something.
Yeah. Or Steve Reich.
Or Steve Reich, yeah. And just...
the phasing
it must be so hard to have just done. Yeah. Ridiculous.
I really liked that score too. Yep. It's one of those things... It's one of those scores that I'm jealous of, that I wish I wrote. Where I don't feel that way with John Williams, just because I don't. John Williams. The way John Williams writes wouldn't be natural to my language. But Oppenheimer was like, oh man, this is so good and so up my alley.
So much so.
It's
yes,
great.
It really is, and again, it's. I was just going to say it's one of those scores which is so. The conception of it is so good. He started with a concept and he's gone, I'm going to do this and I'm going to fulfill that. And he does. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. It fits the movie so well.
It's appropriate. Exactly. Yep. It just works so well. Yeah. I mean, phenomenal score.
Anyway, Dom, thank you so much for coming back and having such a great discussion with me. It's always fun to talk to you.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, and it's brilliant to talk to you as well. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been so enjoyable, and lots of different strands of dialogue, and brilliant. Love it.
Yeah, I love that.
So
Getting to pick your brain about the things I've been pondering, like the half steps, why all these different things. Tell people where they can find your work and support your work.
Well, it's just Dominic Sewell Music on YouTube is probably the best place to start. Otherwise, I have a website, which I don't regularly update. I probably should do a little bit more.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, I'm on Threads, again, as Dominic Sewell, and Instagram, if you want to see lots of pictures of me running, food, and landscapes. I don't really post very much music on there, but basically Dominic Sewell Music on YouTube is the place to find my work.
Cool. And he has a Patreon that is very, very good. I'm a patron.
I do indeed. Yeah, thank you for that.
Of course.
That's nice of you.
Of course. And listeners, you know where to find me. You can join my Discord server by becoming a patron as well. Link in the show notes. And you can also find Star Wars Music Minute on YouTube and also on your podcast players and various places on social media. Just look at the show notes. Hopefully that's updated. Anyway, I think that's all we have for today. May the Force be with you, and talk to you next week on Star Wars Music Minute.